Well, welcome everybody to the last session of Finding the Key in the Ageless Wisdom tradition. Mary is off in Seattle, but she's able to tune in, so she will be able to participate with us tonight, even though she's across the country. So the quick review of the ground rules, which I think probably you all know by now. Questions anytime in the chat box. I'll try to remember to look at it. And the webinar is being recorded, so you can listen to it later, and I believe Pablo will send you links after it's finished tomorrow, no doubt. So the outline, of course, is there, and tonight it's the spiritual life and the Mahatmas with a little bit of a review first. So before the review, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat box. And just to check, how many of you got something out of the worldview program last week? Type your comments in the chat box. Perhaps it was all new to you. Perhaps it was something you've heard before. Did it have any meaning for you? Did you see how important it is to have a world, to know what our worldview is, how important it is to see how it affects the way we live, it affects our values, it affects our behavior. And obviously there are many different types of worldviews in the world, and even in any single country. So if you have any comments on that, just add it to the chat box and I'll respond. Now, the review of our worldview and how it affects us. I hope you see that it's important both culturally and individually. We do have one comment in the chat box. The worldview is more than myself. Okay, so it certainly is more than what we think about ourselves, isn't it? Because very often it's unconscious. We say one thing when we really have a very different value from what we're actually saying, and we behave in a different way than we claim we should behave. So the worldview shapes our values, and it shapes our behavior, comes out of the values. Now, can you see that our self-image is a major block to self-transformation, or at least it can be. It is not necessarily. So if I think of myself as my body and my brain, if I think that's what I am, I may act one way. If I think of myself as more than that, I may act differently. You know, self-preservation is a powerful fact in all living creatures. We all want to survive. But what wants to survive? If I think it's only my body, then I act differently than if I think I'm more than the body. I act differently if I think there is survival of bodily death. If I think I'm only my body, perhaps I would sacrifice myself for someone else. More likely, I would try to save myself because I am that body, you see. So we act differently depending on who and what we think we are. Now, the sense data is powerful, more powerful than anything we believe sometimes, because the sense data gives us a different picture of our world. The senses are not wrong, they are partial. They give us a partial view of the world. Even current science knows that there is more to the world than we can detect with our 5 physical senses. We can't see certain colors on the spectrum. They go further than our eyes permit us to see, yet clairvoyance can. I worked with Johnny Kuntz, who was the son of Dora Kuntz, the well-known clairvoyant, and while he was not clairvoyant, he said in a particular class in college, a professor showed a spectrum of light, and he asked if anyone could see further than a certain point. Johnny could, and reported what he saw. And the professor said, I know it is there, but I never met anyone who could see it. But Johnny could see it. So our sense data doesn't report those things, except in rare cases, that cannot be detected by our 5 physical senses. And of course, our senses tell us we're separate creatures, don't they? Especially sight. Hearing is a little more unitive. We feel together at a concert with our eyes closed. But when we open them, we see individual instruments and people and place and the scenery around us in the theater. So our society, culture, teachers, media, personal experience and everything gives us a world view. Society, cultures, and teachers more or less impress on us the cultural worldview of that community, but the personal experiences make our worldview unique. And that gives us our concepts, our values, our beliefs, and then our behavior, and we get feedback, which from the feedback we either just change our behavior or we change aspects of our world view. Oh, here's that famous little arrow. There we go. Okay. So we go from there to the spiritual life and the Mahatmas. The spiritual life, I always feel, may begin with 3 questions. Who am I? Where are my roots? Where did I come from? Same question. What is the purpose of it all? Not too long ago, I conducted a memorial for a very well-known, worldwide well-known, popular Scottish country dance teacher. She was loved the world over in the Scottish dance community. And I began the program saying, when you were a child, did you ever look into a mirror and say, who am I? I did that once. And there was a sudden shift in consciousness, and it frightened me. So I never did it again, but I never forgot the question. So who am I? If we have a materialistic worldview, which my younger brother did, the first thing that he would ask, and he did, was, who am I in the sense of his biological history? So he went back trying to trace the family tree. I would have told him that's a spiritual question, but if I did, he would have emphatically rejected it. But I think it was a spiritual question. He wanted to know, who am I? And since his worldview was, I am my body and my brain, the only answer he could accept would be that family tree tracing. So, and what is the purpose of it all? Human beings are rather unique in that. They seem to need purpose. They seem to need meaning. It's not enough that something happened and without explanation. We need some kind of explanation. Even if we get the wrong explanation, we're satisfied once we have an explanation for whatever has happened in front of us. Now, just a quick review of what we call the upper triad. Remember, there are 7 principles, according to Blavatsky, and there is the upper 3 are called the upper triad, and the lower 4 are called the lower quaternary. So remember, we talked about Atma being consciousness itself, awareness itself, not any objects of consciousness, just that beingness. HPB used a noun. A noun doesn't do anything. You need a verb to do something, don't you? A noun, beingness, not being, that implies process. So there's just that consciousness itself, and Theosophical philosophy suggests that that is the ground of being. It is everywhere present, in every atom, in every galaxy, in every rock, plant, animal, human, angel, archangel, if there be such. Everywhere consciousness exists, and it exists equally with matter. No consciousness without matter, no matter without consciousness. But Atma is a point in that ultimate consciousness, and it is said that is our truly eternal self, all else being to some extent less so. Buddhi being that state of mind where we get insight, where we suddenly get a flash of understanding. We didn't have it before, we didn't know, we were struggling with a concept, can't get it. Suddenly, without warning, it comes. And we know. That's called Buddhi. Now in the chat box I see enjoyed, I guess, the worldview. It it was fresh and new for me. It has meaning as I continue my studies. So thank you for that. So there's buddhi, and those two are universal. We're only a point in ultimate consciousness, you see. We're not a creature, a point. No dimension. So nothing in one sense, and yet a point in the eternal. So that, connected with buddhi, is said to be universal. We don't have an individual atmic body or an individual buddhic body. Then comes the individuality of the mind, and the mind has two major functions. Buddhi manas, which is that aspect of mind which deals with the abstract, which deals with concepts. They're not physical, you see. Percepts are physical. We perceive certain things. Animals do as well. So that aspect of our mind is said to be the true human soul, and it is those three, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, which is the reincarnating ego. The other part of the mind, of course, is Kama Manas, which is the emotional and thinking aspect of our mind. And as I mentioned in the last webinar, probably, Joy Mills called that aspect of our mind, instead of Kama Manas, she called it flinking, combination of feeling and thinking, because we know the difference between the two, but we cannot separate them in the actual experience. The actual experience has both feeling and thought in it, and you can't really separate them. So it's flinking. So now we come to this idea of spiritual development. What is it that progresses? So many people think, I am going to reincarnate. But who is I? See? Ed is never going to reincarnate. Ed is a process from birth to death. But that's never going to be reborn. I probably mentioned in the session on life after death that reincarnation to me is very much like the 5-year-old child that we all once were. It will never be reborn. It's dead forevermore, gone forevermore. Yet all of that experience is absorbed into the inner self. The lessons learned are there. They come out as character in the next incarnation. They come out as innate talents in the next incarnation. But the personality perishes. It does not survive. It does survive for maybe 15, 20 years, God knows how long exactly, but it does not totally survive. So now we're going to say something about the triple evolutionary scheme before we go further. Blavatsky said there's a triple evolutionary scheme. The physical, which even modern evolutionary theorists say has come to a halt, in the sense that there seems to be no more glorious and grand creatures coming along than human beings, no more talented, more clever creatures than human beings. Minor changes, of course, are still going on. Then there's mental evolution. That's the evolution that takes place within that reincarnating ego, you see, because we are the mind. That evolves. We learn from our experiences in an incarnation. And then there's the spiritual evolution, the monad itself. The monad is Atma Buddhi. So in one sense, God, if you put it in quotes and don't think of it as an anthropomorphic creature, evolves. And I don't know whether I told you this story or not, but it's worth repeating even if I did. Years ago, I read in the New York Times in the Metropolitan Diary a little story around the time of Passover. And a Jewish family was celebrating the Passover with reading the Haggadah, and they had two young children, one about 4 or 5 years old and one about 9 or 10. And the little 4 or 5-year-old, when they were reading all the horrible things that God did to the Egyptians, he was very upset, and he said, I thought God was good. Why did he do all those horrible things and even kill the horses? And the other girl said, oh, you don't understand. God was much younger then. So she wasn't too far off from a theosophical point of view. God, that is Atma Buddhi, was much younger than, not Atma really, because that's the one absolute eternal. But the second principle, or the sixth, if you count from the bottom up as the Adepts did, is evolving. So the upper triad Atma does not progress, Buddhi Manas progresses, that is our mind, and Kama Manas eventually perishes after death. Okay, what is real to us? HPB says, and it's very easy to see it's true, she says, what we are experiencing at the moment is the only reality for us. Don't you think that's true? If anybody wants to comment on it. What we are experiencing, it doesn't matter what we believe is true. What we are experiencing at the moment, that must be underlined 3 times, at the moment is the only reality for us. This may be partly because we're one-pointed in consciousness. We mentioned that when we talked about Atma. If I'm focused on my big toe that I just stubbed, as I mentioned in another session, that for me at that very moment is the only reality. Excuse me. I can say, I believe I'm Atma Buddhi Manas until the cows come home, you know. But at that moment, there's just that pain in the big toe, you see. So what for us is real at the moment is the experience we're having. Now, how do we identify if we think that the body is the real me? For example, if I identify only with my body, and no one really does completely, I think, emotions and body maybe, mind and body and emotions maybe, but if we think that it's all brain processes, that I am my body and my brain is me, then we might act in a way that the body wants. So let's say we're employed, and in the morning the alarm goes off at 7 a.m. We don't feel like getting up. We're very tired. We're very sleepy. We close off the alarm and we go back to sleep until 10 a.m. and then we're late for work. Keep it up and you'll lose your job, of course. But the body overcomes what the mind says we should do. We identify just with that body. Emotions. We can be at a wonderful party all evening long. Comes 2 in the morning and my body is saying, take me home, put me to bed. But my emotions, say, no, I'm having a good time. I want to stay until dawn. And we do, and the body suffers for it. So even to the detriment of our body and soul. Now, what about the mind? If I identify with my mind, as many people do, then we get very offended when people disagree with us, don't we? A little bell goes off in my head whenever I get upset because somebody has a different opinion from mine. I say, Ed, you're identifying with your mind, you're identifying with your thoughts, you think that's who you are. So we get upset. And then fanaticism, of course, is a thorough identification with the ideas in our own mind. If we identify with the spiritual nature, with Buddhi Manas, with the universal, then we tend to do what is right for the whole, because that's who we are, you see. So it depends very much on who we think we are. Now, the direction of the spiritual life, where did that one go? Did I get 2 there gone? Let me see. No, there seems to be missing one. Okay, maybe it'll come up next. Let me just check and see if that's true. Yeah, I had them in reverse order. The direction in the spiritual life, and the direction we are to move if we want to progress in the spiritual sense, from the fleeting to the everlasting, from the changing to the eternal, from the personal to the universal. Okay, self-transformation requirements. First of all, one has to want to change. There has to be a longing in the heart to understand, to get the why, to find out who we really are. That has to be a strong, strong drive. That's the sine qua non, without which nothing. No desire for that, no longing for that, nothing follows, because you don't do anything then, do you? But with that drive, then the next step is what's been called in the various religious traditions, it's been called purification. Now that step got very misunderstood in different traditions. In India, they seem to think that you had to lie on a bed of nails. In medieval Christian Europe, wearing a hair shirt was supposed to purify you somehow. It was to punish yourself for your sins, you see, and through that maybe you would come to, well, they'd call enlightenment in the East and to heaven in the West. I always say no one needs a bed of nails or a hair shirt. Life will provide them very easily, so you don't need to make one up. It'll be there in your trials and troubles. So that what really purification is all about, I believe, is so changing our emotional mental nature, transforming it so that it becomes reflective of buddhi manas. Somebody is trying to call. Okay, I shut it off. So it's purifying the emotional mental nature so that it reflects accurately the higher nature. The example I always give is a mountain lake. If it is very full of ripples, it does not accurately reflect what is above it. But once it is calm, it can accurately reflect what is above it. So that's the nature of purification. The dissolution of kama manas as an independent ego. That is, the principle of kamas, the principle of manas, does not disappear. But our identification of it as a whirlpool. Hello? Hello? All right. Sorry about that. But they wouldn't give up. All right. So what disappears is that little vortex in the lake that is our personal ego. You see that? That whirlpool lasts from birth to death. But after death, gradually it goes back, and all is calm again. So there is a union. Consciousness is united again with the higher nature. And then I've added here the destruction of antakarana. I didn't mention that before, but it's alleged that there's a link between brain consciousness and the higher nature, and that practice of meditation, something like that, expands that link so that it is more easy to go from being centered in brain consciousness to being centered in the inner self. Those of you who meditate will know that for a fact, even if you never heard the term antakarana. We can make that shift from the brain consciousness center to the inner self much more easily if we meditate regularly, and if our goal is always to be at one with the eternal. And at enlightenment, that link is broken, and then it's really clear that there's only one mind. There isn't any longer a kama manas mind. There are still those principles, but we have broken the personal ego. I think the Christian scripture that is best represents that is, he who would save his life will lose it, but he who will lose his life for my sake, that's the eternal, shall find it unto life eternal. So then there's a metamorphosis, isn't there? There's a total change of our nature, and it reminds me of the two caterpillars who were talking, and they were looking up at a butterfly, and one caterpillar said to the other one, "You're never going to get me up in one of those." So the caterpillar has to totally dissolve, does he not? We, in a sense, metaphorically, totally dissolve, so that the inner self can be fully born. Now, in the voice of the silence, to reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast first to give up self. That's the kama manas, you see. To non-self, that's the universal. Being to non-being, and then thou canst repose between the wings of the great bird. Aye, sweet as rest between the wings of that which is not born nor dies. The eternal is never born, never dies. There is now current scientific theory that perhaps the Big Bang isn't quite correct. There never was a beginning to the universe. Theosophically speaking, we'd say quite true. Never a beginning, but countless Big Bangs throughout eternity. The universe goes to maximum entropy, and then there's another explosion, another Big Bang, and it all starts again, coming from the actions of the past. So even the solar system evolves, you see. This image is wonderful because although I think technically it's incorrect, it would appear that the point between the point between the wings right here is still. That would appear that way, wouldn't it? As the wings flap. The wings are the polar opposites, the positive, the negative, you see. The polarization of the universe, but the stillness is in the center. I gave a talk years ago called The Still Point Beyond Good and Evil. So now what have we got? Some people seem to think that moving away from the personal means they should be indifferent. Some in India whose faith is the Hindu faith, one of the various types of Hindu faiths, they seem to think that, well, if you're starving on the street, it's your karma, and they don't have anything to do with it. That's indifference in a callous way. It is not what the Theosophical philosophy teaches at all. To move away from the personal does not mean to be indifferent to the needs of other people. In the voice of the silence we read, to live to benefit mankind is the first step, not the last step. In the very beginning, that has to be burning in our hearts to alleviate the misery of humanity. We can't do it by ourselves. Anybody who says that is just talking foolishness. We can, in our own circle, do something. And we can, by meditation, do a lot throughout the world. Voice of the silence again. And we seek in the impersonal for the eternal man, struggle only with the personal, the transitory, the evanescent, and the perishable. Remember, you can put anything in the chat box if you'd like. So now the work and the method. How do we do this? We want to be centered in the inner self. We want to progress in this spiritual sense. What do? The work is to seek and do the good for its own sake, not for some ulterior purpose. To seek the right for its own sake, regardless of personal consequences. Rare is the person who does that. Some politicians even refuse to vote their conscience, what they think is right, because they're afraid it will cost them votes. So they don't do what they know is right. Instead, they do what they know is not right so that they get personal benefit. And this example can be spread out over the world and all of us in some cases, no doubt. In one of the Upanishads, the sweet is one thing, the right is another. The example I frequently give is if we're a parent at home and we have a young child, say 3 or 4 years old, and in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., when we're in the most delicious sleep ever, the child cries out in pain. Do we just say, oh, I'll tend to you in the morning and you go back to sleep? No! You get up. You do what you have to do, because the sweet is one thing, sleeping. The right is another, getting up and helping your child. So we probably all sometimes do the right, regardless of the personal consequences. We do what is right, even if it's not the sweet thing. And again, it's rare. Now, the method to do all of this varies with the pilgrim. In the Voice of the Silence, it says the goal is one for all, but it varies with the pilgrim. And why does it vary with the pilgrim? Because that is our life. Now, the 3 limbs of the theosophical life has often been said that the 3 limbs are study, meditation, and service. I used to think they were 3 different things. In my old age, I've realized they are one thing in 3 different aspects. Study is going out from the personal ego, isn't it? We get so absorbed in our study of the spiritual literature that we forget ourselves. We don't think about me while we're engrossed in the reading or the listening to the spiritual message in one way or another. So that's going out from the personal ego. Meditation is a kind of study also, but it's a study within. We study within. We try to access the inner self and understand what it is and identify with it. That's also a kind of study, but it's an internal study, and both study and meditation surpass the personal ego. Excuse me. Now, following from those 2 is service. Once we get some sense of that inner self and its unity with everything, we act differently, because the self now is something more than the me. So we act differently because we must. We can't do anything else. We have to do it. It would violate our character if we did not, you see. So service is not, remember, just great things. Those are wonderful, and some people can do great things. Service is an attitude of mind. It is not just serving in a hospital or a soup line. It's an attitude of mind. In the supermarket, you see a clerk who looks like death warmed over and looks very unhappy. So you smile at the clerk. You say something funny. You make them laugh. You can see immediately you have lifted their spirits by a little bit of laughter. I do this all the time in one of our supermarkets. A woman who has tried and tried and tried to get a different kind of job. She took several different courses in a pharmaceutical study, and I forget the other one, and she just never can get a job. So I go in and I say, "Are you here again?" And she'll laugh, and I'll say something funny, and she looks a little happier. It's service, isn't it? But it's no big deal. Putting chairs away at a meeting, if you're there and can help, is service. There's so many different ways that we can be helpful without thinking of me, you see. So study, meditation, and service have been the 3 limbs of the theosophical life. Now, H.P. Blavatsky was given something called the Golden Stairs, and she said she got it from one of the masters. Since Moria was her personal guru or teacher, and that's what master means, you remember, we think he probably gave it to her. And when he gave it to her, he said, "Give this to those you teach." Now, I believe that was after she had formed the esoteric section of, well, it was called the esoteric section first, and then the esoteric school of Theosophy. And in meetings of that group that still meet around the world, the esoteric school of Theosophy, the Golden Stairs are recited at every meeting, just to remind us how we are meant to live. So it's a clean life. Most religions would agree with that, wouldn't they? They say, yes, you need to live a clean life, basically an ethical life. You don't steal or kill. You follow the 10 Commandments and more. You do what good you can. A clean life. Most religions agree with that. The next one, not so much. An open mind. Oh, that's a little dangerous in some religions. a pure heart. Yes, they'll agree with that. Your motives pure. An eager intellect. Well, that's not embraced by all, is it? But in the golden stairs, it is. So in other words, not just being passive with an open mind, but actively looking for what is true, searching for truth, regardless of whether it contradicts our opinions or not. Most people don't want their opinions contradicted. They reject the truth and keep their opinions. Dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. So an eager intellect, an unveiled spiritual perception, a sense of that buddhimanas, a sense of the eternal, you see. And when that happens, then what follows? A brotherliness for one's co-disciple, a readiness to give and receive advice and instruction. We always can help somebody else. There's always somebody more ignorant than us, and there's always someone who knows more than we do. So a willingness to help enlighten some of our less brilliant brothers and sisters, and a willingness to accept advice and instruction when we need it, and we don't often like that because it feels like we're being corrected, feels like we were wrong. Doesn't matter whether you're wrong or right. What matters is to find the truth, accept it, and move on. So a loyal sense of duty to the teacher, that's a capital T. It could mean one of the adepts, but I think, frankly, it means the inner self, which is the true teacher. So a loyal sense of duty to the teacher, a willing obedience to the behests of truth once we have placed our confidence in and believe that teacher to be in possession of it. Then comes a very, very difficult one that H.P. Blavatsky had a hard time following, didn't make it most of the time. A courageous endurance of personal injustice. That is so hard to take. But it is important. That doesn't mean we lie down as a rug and let people walk on us. It doesn't mean that at all, because the very next statement makes that clear. Courageous endurance of personal injustice, but then a brave declaration of principles and a valiant defense of those who are unjustly attacked. Many years ago, when I was president, one of the times I was president of the New York Theosophical Society, we had in our group a very difficult man. He really was enough to make you lose patience altogether. And one time at a board meeting, one of the board members said, "Oh, you get along with this person because he's always kissing up to you," and so forth. I said, "Now look, I get more of his complaints than any of you, and I have told him that next time he sends me a 10-page email, I will delete it on sight. I want bulleted points, no more than 1 page. And but remember, this person who you are criticizing is a very dedicated member and extremely kind and generous." So there was, once at least, a defense of someone unjustly attacked, and you can think of many in your own life and in examples. So a valiant defense of those unjustly attacked, and remember the word is defense, not offense, not attacking the person, but defending the one unjustly attacked, not attacking the other individual. Now, the final bit, and a courageous endurance, beg your pardon, a constant eye to the ideal of human progression and perfection, which the secret science depicts. Somehow the last little bit of that got lost, and the last little bit is, "These are the golden stairs up the steps of which the learner may climb to the temple of divine wisdom." So there are the golden stairs, a very short little directive of how to live. Now the masters, the Mahatmas, the Adepts, different names for teachers of HPB, and the two that we know most about because of their letters were K.H. Kutumi and Morya, or sometimes frequently called M, just M. He'd sign his name that way frequently. So these individuals are 100% human beings. They're not gods. They're not spirits any more than you and I are. They don't live forever, though they may live for hundreds of years, but not thousands of years, at least their physical body. So HPB's teachers have been called Mahatmas, meaning literally great souls, Adepts, masters, but only in the sense of a schoolmaster, and most commonly when HPB was around, they were called the Brothers, simply the Brothers. Quotes from the Mahatma letters that will give you some idea of what these men teach. What is an adept? Excuse me. This was a common question in HPB's days because nobody heard of people like this. She always said she was in touch with the Brothers, and the Brothers taught her this and that, and she had profound dedication to them and all that. Nobody'd seen them, but they heard about them. So they wanted to know, what were these two men like? Were they gods? Were they simple human beings? What was the difference? And Sinnett, A.P. Sinnett, who was a prominent Englishman in the British Raj, he asked Blavatsky, if I wrote a letter to them, would they answer? She said, I don't know. Write a letter and give it to me. I'll see. Well, they did. He was so anxious, he wrote a second letter before he got the first letter answered. But he did get it answered. And among the questions he must have asked, because we don't have his correspondence, only the answers from K.H. Moria and occasionally someone else, the answer about what an adept is, K.H. wrote the highest as the lowest is one only during the exercise of his occult powers. Only then, not otherwise. Whenever these powers are needed, the sovereign will unlocks the door to the inner man, the adept, who can emerge and act freely. The smallest exercise of occult powers, then, as you will now see, requires an effort. We may compare it to the inner muscular effort of an athlete preparing to use his physical strength. As no athlete is likely to be always amusing himself at swelling his veins in anticipation of having to lift a weight, so no adept can be supposed to keep his will in constant tension and the inner man in full function when there is no immediate necessity for it. When the inner man rests, the adept becomes an ordinary man. Well, he says ordinary, I would say extraordinary. Limited to his physical senses and the functions of his physical brain, just like you and me. Habit sharpens the intuition of the latter, yet is unable to make them supersensuous. The inner adept is ever ready, ever on the alert, and that suffices for our purposes. At moments of rest, then, his faculties are at rest also. When I, K.H., sit at my meals, or when I am dressing, reading, or otherwise occupied, I am not thinking even of those near me. Now, he had a student, a high student, called a Chela, named Jwal Kul, who lived near him, and who was on the way to becoming an adept himself. And K.H. writes, Jwal Kul can easily break his nose to blood by running in the darkness against a beam, as he did the other night, and I remain placidly ignorant of the fact. I was not thinking of him, hence my ignorance, and he underlines that. In other words, he's suggesting if he had been thinking of him, he would have picked it up and realized that Jwal Kul had run his nose to blood. Now, even some of us, certainly I and many people I know, can sometimes do that in a limited way. If I'm thinking of someone, sometimes I can get the feeling. Just a quick example, many years ago, a Scottish dance friend of ours, a very good friend, verbally attacked Mary at a dance, saying she'd done something wrong. Well, as many husbands, I rose to the occasion and I snapped at my friend. Well, the next morning my friend called me and said she was so upset by my jumping on her that she cried and so forth and hoped we were still friends. And I said, of course we're still friends. And I told her why I jumped and then I apologized for hurting her feelings. Well, about an hour later, she had called me from work. I suddenly got an image of my friend radiantly happy. I did not know why, but I knew she was happy because I thought of her and somehow linked into her. I called her. I got voicemail. I said her name, and I said, you know, I know you're really happy now, and I'm certainly glad you are. Well, a half hour later, I got a call back from her. She said, you are impossible. I said, why? She said, when you called, I had just gotten a dozen roses from my husband, and he said, I hope you have a better day today than yesterday. And I sat there thinking, am I not lucky to have such good friends as my husband and Ed? So there, I had done that, but KH can do it at will and will always get it. So KH adds, from the aforesaid, you may well infer that an adept is an ordinary mortal at all moments of his daily life, but those when the inner man is acting. KH, when writing to us, is not an adept. A non-adept is fallible. Therefore, you see, the Mahatma letters are not truly Mahatma letters. They are letters from KH and Moria, and contain a great deal of wisdom, no doubt. But therefore, KH may very easily commit mistakes, you see. So they're not omniscient, they're not infallible, and they're not omnipotent. Now, the primary purpose for the organization known as the Theosophical Society that the Adepts inspired, they didn't found it, but they inspired it to be found. Primary purpose is universal brotherhood. This is forgotten so often when we get involved in the metaphysics. So KH wrote, the chiefs, that is their superiors, want a brotherhood of humanity, a real universal fraternity started, an institution which would make itself known throughout the world and arrest the attention of the highest minds. And indeed, in some cases, it did arrest the highest minds. Just as one example, Thomas Edison was a member of the society. And there were many other scientists, and today also scientists, who are members. Another quote, it is he alone who has the love of humanity at heart, who is capable of grasping thoroughly the idea of a regenerating practical brotherhood, who is entitled to the possession of our secrets. He alone, such a man, will never misuse his powers. Now, of course, this was pre-non-gender specific language. He means men and women, of course. As there will be no fear that he should turn them to selfish ends. A man who places not the good of mankind above his own good is not worthy of becoming our chela. He is not worthy of becoming higher in knowledge than his neighbor. And what did the New Testament Jesus say? That if you love mother and father more than me, you are not worthy of me. You see, it's that higher nature rather than the personal attachments that we have. Science, very much in favor of science. The doctrine we promulgate, being the only true one, must, supported by such evidence as we are preparing to give, become ultimately triumphant as every other truth. Yet, it is absolutely necessary to inculcate it gradually, enforcing its theories with direct evidence furnished by modern exact science. Find me some channeled entity who says that. You won't, I don't think. Self-purification, which we mentioned before. This is kind of shocking to some. Chelaship, that is, being a direct student linked to one of the adepts, unveils the inner man and draws forth the dormant vices as well as the dormant virtue. The process of self-purification is not the work of a moment nor of a few months, but of years, nay, extending over a series of lives. So we need to be patient with ourselves. We're not going to do it in 10 minutes. We're not going to do it in one lifetime. The later a man begins living the higher life, the longer must be his period of probation. They watch people before they take them on as a student. They have to be sure, or at least reasonably sure, that this person is going to behave well enough. For he has to undo the effects of long number of years spent in objects diametrically opposed to the real goal. That's psychological inertia, isn't it? Energy runs along the lines of least resistance. We act along the lines of least resistance. And if we've been doing it for years, we can't expect a change in 2 seconds. It takes time and it takes effort. Freedom. Some people think the adepts tell them what to do. They say no such thing. A chela under probation is allowed to think and do whatever he likes. He is warned and told beforehand, you will be tempted and deceived by appearances. A man's character, his true inner nature, can never be thoroughly drawn out if he believes himself watched. I always tell the story about the priest at St. Patrick's Cathedral on the day of the St. Patrick's Day parade, and the cardinal goes out on the steps of the cathedral to watch the parade, and one of the priests is up at the high altar, and he suddenly sees Jesus, and he becomes terrified. He runs down the nave, through the great doors, tugs on the vestments of the cardinal, and says, Your Eminence, I've just seen our blessed Lord. What should I do? The cardinal looks down and says, Look busy. So when the mouse is away, when the cat is away, the mouse will play. Isn't that true? Selfishness. Selfishness and the want of self-sacrifice are the greatest impediments on the path to adeptship. But there's more than the ordinary kind of selfishness. There are persons who, without ever showing any external sign of selfishness, are intensely selfish in their inner spiritual aspirations. These will follow the path once chosen by them with their eyes closed to the interest of all but themselves, and see nothing outside the narrow pathway filled with their own personality. They are so intensely absorbed in the contemplation of their own supposed righteousness that nothing can ever appear right to them outside the focus of their own vision and their judgment of the right and wrong. Don't we know a lot of people who will not be confused by fact? So that's a kind of inner selfishness. Impersonality and motive. Seek in the impersonal for the eternal man. That was mentioned before. Struggle only with the personal, the transitory, the evanescent, and the perishable. Also mentioned before. And then we have a continuation of that. Learn to be loyal to the idea rather than my poor self. K.H. wrote that. Don't be loyal to me, he said. Be loyal to the principles, the idea. That's where the loyalty belongs, not to individuals. Don't worship individuals, he's suggesting. Be loyal to the idea and treat individuals as your fellow human beings. Love your neighbor as yourself, as Jesus put it. And I think it may be in the Old Testament as well. Then he adds a curious statement. Motive is everything to us. What you intend to do is more important than what you may actually do. And I think that means if I act out of a personal motive, if Ed does something for some reason, Ed gets the karmic consequences of it. But if the inner self of Ed, rooted in the universal, does something, the consequences come back to the universal. So the motive, whether it's personal or universal, is everything to us. Two of the greatest snares on the path to adeptship. Pride, and that's considered the greatest of the cardinal sins in the church, isn't it? Pride. Lucifer allegedly got kicked out of heaven because of pride. Pride is separative, isn't it? Me, as opposed to you. There's a wonderful line in The Voice of the Silence. I may not have the words quite right, but nearly so. Self-gratulation is like unto a haughty fool who hath climbed a tower, and there sits in prideful solitude, unperceived by any but himself. Egoism. Always the problem is this identification with the personal ego, the me, the me, the me. Everything is me. These pride and egoism, two of the greatest snares. Pitfalls. You were told that the path to occult sciences has to be trodden laboriously and crossed at the danger of life. That every new step in it leading to the final goal is surrounded by pitfalls and cruel thorns. That the pilgrim who ventures upon it is made first to confront and conquer the 1,001 furies who keep watch over its adamantine gates and entrance. Furies called doubt, skepticism, scorn, ridicule, envy, and finally, temptation, especially the latter. And that he who would see beyond had first to destroy this living wall. That's the personal ego, isn't it? Had to destroy, not true self, not individuality, this false identity with the thinking, feeling mechanism we call me. That he must be possessed of a heart and soul clad in steel, and of an iron, never failing determination, and yet be meek and gentle, humble, and have shut out from his heart every human passion that leads to evil. And he said to Sinnett, "Are you all this?" Well, no, not yet. He says we have one word for all aspirants, try, and they use that word many times in the letters. Now, a quick review will take maybe a little bit over the hour, but not much. We started with the Eternal One, that pre-Big Bang void, and yet not emptiness, not things, not atoms, subatomic particles at best, according to science. No differentiation, and then a polarization. The eternal background real never changes. We are a point in that, and as that never change, there, everything else changes. Therefore, nothing else is eternal. Our essential nature, we talked about the 7 human principles, the first 2 being universal, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, composed of 2 aspects, the higher or in more conceptual nature being the higher mind, which is the reincarnating ego. We talked about life after death, that for a while the personal ego survives in its highest nature, and then gradually that is dissipated and its lessons absorbed into the inner self. Then we talked about our worldview and how it affects us, that we act very differently depending on what we think we are, who we think we are. Remember the Queen in one of the owl stories said, "Remember who you are." And then the spiritual life and the Mahatmas this evening. Now, I want to sort more or less end with this, except give you a chance to have some questions. And I see there is one that I missed over here in the chat box. Let me see what it is. Is it possible that an adept would communicate with us at an individual level? Very good question, and it's something I omitted. The adepts say they never, ever help people with personal problems. They do say that if we are working along the lines that they would like us to work, that is, working for the benefit of humanity, whether it's just in our own little circle, doing what we can, forgetting ourselves, but to be there to help others, if we're doing that, they say you are automatically within the sphere of their influence. You may get inspired to do something by them without ever realizing it was from them. So yes, they can communicate. In my book, The Masters of Wisdom, I talk about Dora Kuntz, one of my mentors I knew for about 40 years. I have no doubt she knew these adepts, that is K.H. and Moria, and that she had seen them. She describes their facial expressions, something you'll find in no literature anywhere in the Theosophical movement. And she never ever talked about anything out of her experience. Always when she gave a talk, she said, "I'm not talking from books, I'm talking from my experience." So yes, but it's rare. And the alleged communications with masters is very doubtful to me, because very often it's on a very personal basis very often. So yes, they can, but they're not likely to unless we're far along the path and they feel they need to get in touch with us in some way personally. So you can be inspired by them without any doubt. But to have personal contact with them is highly unlikely in almost all cases, but not all cases. So I wanted to come to this conclusion, go back to what we talked about in the beginning here, because this is what we've been aiming for in all of these sessions, whether it looked like it or not. This was what I hoped you would do. This is what I hoped I have in some way helped you to focus on, in some way helped you to feel inspired to do, to look forward to this possibility of awakening within yourself your true nature, that reincarnating self that endures through all the incarnations and learns through each incarnation. If we looked within ourselves and centered our point of observation on the inner self, we would soon escape from the coils of the great serpent of illusion. From the cradle to the grave, our lives would then become supportable and worth living, even in its worst phases. Isn't that a wonderful thing? I hope that you might all move in that direction, and that bit by bit, life after life, this will become reality to you and not theory, because there's a huge difference between the map and the place the map represents. T.S. Eliot put it, when we come to this inner realization, it is like coming home and recognizing the place for the first time. That is solidly true. And I hope all of you will have that experience, as I and many thousands have had. On the screen are the two books I've written. Covers The Secret Gateway, which will give you a tremendous amount more information on the Theosophical philosophy in layman's terms, in contemporary terms, in easy to understand terms. And then the Masters of Wisdom, the second book I wrote, will give you a great deal more about the Mahatmas. It'll give you a lot more of what they have to say in their letters. There is a chapter about people who met them. No less than 30 reputable individuals met them physically and reported on their encounters. And one of the most amazing is Colonel Alcott, the first president founder of the Theosophical Society, when Moria came to him in New York City. And just to tease you a little bit into wanting to read about this, it's in Old Diary Leaves, by the way, the first volume. He said he was living in New York with Blavatsky at 47th Street and 8th Avenue, southwest corner. It's still there. If you get to New York, I'll show it to you. He said he was reading, and suddenly the wall became very full of light, and there stood Moria in front of him. Well, he fell to his knees, and Moria basically said, "Don't be an idiot, get up." He didn't say that, of course, but he said, "Get up, we're going to talk about the work." And they spent quite a long time talking about it, and he said Moria told him about some of his own faults and some of the faults of HPB, which he would not repeat, and Moria told him what he expected him to do, what he wanted him to do. And as he was sitting there, he suddenly thought, when I wake up, I'm going to think this was a dream. Well, Moria was in rapport with him, so he knew what he thought. He took off his turban, put it on the night table, and in the morning, that turban was there. And the turban that Moria wore is now at Adyar, the Theosophical headquarters in Adyar, Chennai, India. So that story is there, but a lot of others, and what they had to say about karma, what they had to say about life after death, a great deal more. So I hope that if you're interested in all these things, you might read these books. You can get them from a library. You don't have to borrow them. I mean, you don't have to buy them. The Secret Gateway, I've given all the royalties to the Theosophical Society in America anyway, so I'm not getting anything from that, and I don't want anything. And the Masters of the Wisdom, I did get a contract, but I have given most of what I got as an advance back to the Society in one way or another. So you may find these of interest. And now there's some books: Voice of the Silence, Secret Doctrine, Mahatma Letters, Ancient Wisdom, Modern Insight. That one is available still. Dialogues with Scientists and Sages is out of print, but it's an excellent one. You could get it maybe from a library or from maybe Amazon has it as a used copy. Key to Theosophy, and Mary especially likes the Dalai Lama's book, The Universe in a Single Atom. And now, any questions and answers? I see a thank you, and thank you for being part of this. Anything else in the chat box? If not, then just the last slide here, which would be Thank you, and my email address again, that if you care to email me any questions or comments, and my webpage. The webpage, by the way, has links to the Theosophical Society in America, www.theosophical.org. You can get lots of videos and audio programs there, not just by me, but many, many others, and you can pick and choose what you'd like to see and hear, no charge. And you can also buy things as well. And there's also a link on my website to the international headquarters and to local groups. You can get to local groups also. So it's been wonderful having you participate. Thank you, says John, and I so appreciate that you wrote The Secret Gateway. Thank you. Very good. I appreciate all your comments. Bless you for all your knowledge and sharing. And let us know also when available on YouTube. Yes, I think I'm sure Pablo will let me know, if he doesn't let all of you know, when it's available on the YouTube, and that he told me originally that would be maybe a couple months from now. So when it is available, I'll be sure that you all get to know that. So thanks everyone, and enjoy yourself, and good luck in your studies and in your life.